Hello, everyone, and welcome to our MuniciPality. This is a podcast exploring the wonders of local government and politics through discussions and special guests. And for today's episode, Natalia and I are interviewing Ben Knudson. Ben grew up in Nebraska and went to McAllister College in St. Paul. He works on waste reduction and recycling for Hennepin County in Minnesota. And today we'll be exploring policymaking, waste, and combating the climate crisis, as well as a few other things. So welcome to our MuniciPality, Ben.
Thank you.
We're so glad to have you. I'm really excited about this topic, and Natalia and I were talking about it much earlier and chatting a bit before this podcast, so I'm excited to get into the questions. Can you start by telling us a bit about your job and what led you to this field?
Sure. Yeah, I work for Hennepin County in the Environment and Energy Department, and specifically in the Waste Reduction and Recycling Unit. And what's unique about our job at the county is that we have the primary responsibility for solid waste management in Minnesota. So there's a lot of action that happens at the local government level. And we're involved in so many different aspects, from waste prevention and reuse to traditional recycling, organics recycling, and really engaging residents wherever they are, work, school, at home, to figure out how we can reduce waste, reuse, and recycle. Those traditional 3 R's.
So what do you find so interesting about trash then, Ben? And what can trash show us about ourselves, society, and its values as a whole?
Trash really is fascinating because everyone has a personal connection to waste. Everyone can talk about it. They can talk about their experience, and it's really shows a lot of insight on how we live. I mean, it tells a lot of stories, and we know that from doing our waste sort studies, where we take a look and see, hey, what's left in the trash and how can we do better? So when we're looking at that, it really drives home the single-use packaged on-the-go lifestyle that we live. And it also tells us about how much cheap stuff is out there and how much of it we buy. So when we're looking in the trash, we see clothes, toys that are actually still pretty good in some cases, except they're going into the trash. The take-home message, too, is that there's a lot of food waste, a lot of organics in the trash. It's the most common item. So it tells us a little bit about people's good intentions. Maybe they buy those veggies, they put them in the fridge, and they just kind of languish there, and they're not eaten. But it also tells us that we can do better. We have a lot of room for improvement.
That's really interesting, and I think the food waste aspect of it is cool, especially now that we're going to be talking a bit about organic recycling and stuff. But the good intentions I think come with a lot of the things in sustainability, even folks trying to maybe buy stuff with better packaging, but then not recycling it properly or other things like that, I'm sure happen too in the waste stream. But our next question is if you could tell us about some of the sustainable policies and programs that Hennepin County has, such as their recycling ordinance and the Fixit clinics.
Yeah, I'm really excited about our recycling ordinance. I think this will help us move forward in a big way. So our board approved a business food waste recycling requirement and a city organics requirement. So when we were looking at what was left in the trash, as I mentioned earlier, by far the most common material in the trash is food waste, is organics. So we said, well, it makes sense that businesses that generate large quantities of organics should be required to divert that material from the trash. And we went about it in a more targeted way. So we said, a lot of this is being generated in the back of house, in a kitchen area, food prep area. And I think it's the right thing to do to have those businesses put that waste to better use. And so we're moving forward with restaurants, hotels, grocery stores, diverting that material from the trash and doing something better with it. And then on the other hand, we also decided that people want access to organics recycling, and we can do a lot better at home as well. So by January 1, 2022, cities will be required to provide their residents with the opportunity to sign up for organics recycling service. And that can be done in a variety of ways. There's some flexibility there, but overall, it's just making a level playing field and making sure that people have the opportunity to do the right thing. And that's ties into your question about systems and policies. It's making things accessible, giving people a chance to do the right thing and move forward with it.
I think that's,
And then,
so important, obviously, because we always talk about, or a lot of the discussion sustainability is about access, because so much about making sustainable choices depends on like the level of access you have to making, going to a farmer's market or going to places that don't have as much plastic packaging or eating foods that are healthier that don't come in plastic. And so I think it's really cool that you're making a lot of efforts to kind of level the playing field across the diverse area that is Hennepin County. And so kind of moving into that, so much of we talk about, the zero waste movement, how much people try to reduce and reuse and all these kinds of things, the classic 3 Rs, as you said. And so how would you say, like, how connected are waste and climate action, and how do you think that they're related?
and I think one thing that we lose sight of is that we need to focus on more than just disposal. And the reason I bring that up is because a traditional greenhouse gas inventory, you look at the pie chart and you see, oh, it's all about electricity, natural gas, and vehicle travel. The solid waste management part is a very small slice of that pie. But that's looking at it in maybe not quite the right way. We need to look at it from a different perspective where we think about the stuff we buy, the products we consume. And it's those products we buy that are, that take electricity and natural gas to produce. We have to ship them all over the place. And so if we look at it from a life cycle perspective, our consumption has a big impact. So I like to use an iPhone as an example. It's great. We all love our phones, but perhaps it's a better idea to buy a new one every 3 years than every single year. Because if you think about what it takes to mine those metals, assemble those components, ship it across the ocean, it's not really the disposal piece that's having the biggest climate impact. It's that entire life cycle. It's the production and the transportation of it. So I'd like people to think about that a little more when they think about climate. And to pivot, I think to connect that to our waste programs, it's like instead of focusing on the 1R, the recycling, let's focus on waste reduction. Let's focus on reuse. And we have some programs there that can help with that. So we have a zero waste challenge that people can sign up for, learn how to live a lower waste lifestyle. We have Stop Food Waste Challenge. It's brand new. People can sign up for that right now. And then another thing we like people to do is make some sort of a pledge to buy more from thrift stores. And we have a campaign called Join the Circle that encourages people when they need new sports equipment or they need clothes or they need a book, like visit a reuse retailer and buy something there. That makes a big impact. So we have, I know those are smaller systems right now, but they are impactful, and we're looking to tap people into that and grow those systems.
That's so cool. Like that kind of stuff never, I don't think would have been in the conversation when even Adrian and I were growing up, which wasn't that long ago. But I was also going to add this cool thing that like I found in like my studies as an anthropology major. Part of that is archaeology, and actually I've read pieces where archaeologists even today like study modern societies today specifically through trash. And there was one article that specifically talked about AirPods and how they aren't really designed to be taken apart. Like the battery isn't really something that you can like replace. Like when you fix a pair of AirPods, they basically fix the entire thing, and basically there's no way to like I guess get rid of them. So they're gonna find in like thousands of years, the next archaeologists are gonna find all these little things and have no idea what they are. And so I think it's really interesting that like even today, like we are seeing the effects of that, and like there's kind of these modern archaeologists sorting through the trash trying to understand how to deal with this, because that's what archaeologists do today. They look through people's trash and the stuff that they threw out that preserved in the dirt thousands and thousands of years ago, and I think we're going to leave a pretty big mark right now. So I thought I'd just add that bit because I think about it all the time with AirPods now.
Yeah, that's a good point and a good connection. And on two ways, yeah, trash shows us so much about how we live. And also it reminds me, your comment about the ability to repair certain things or the lack of that ability reminds me of our Fixit clinics, which we run. And people have the ability to come to the Hennepin County Fixit clinics and say, hey, I have this lamp I want to fix, or a toaster, or I have a hole in my mitten that I want to fix. But the electronics can be so difficult because they're not designed to fix, and they're designed for their own little life cycle, and then that's supposed to be it. But people do have a desire to fix things if possible, and that's another cultural thing we're trying to encourage as well. But it's difficult if products aren't designed to be fixed, and it's difficult if not the case with AirPods. But if things are, if the cost of repairing something is higher than buying it new, then we run into some difficulties there.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting. And I have been thinking through this and a bit before, kind of some of the things you were mentioning before about how like there's programs for individuals to like go to the Fixit clinics or get organic recycling bins and then change their own impact on like waste and also choose to like produce less waste, things like that. I'm also interested in the stuff you're talking about earlier with restaurants and hotels and businesses. So I guess how do you in your work or in policy in general like balance focusing on individuals and businesses, and how do those two, I guess, areas of policy interact so that we can, like Natty was talking about earlier, make sustainable choices the more common choice through like private industry, if that makes sense?
That does make sense, and it's a delicate act, right? I think maybe there's a little bit too much burden placed on the individual to make these choices, especially when they're not available. And in the end, I think there's no silver bullet. Like it's not completely on individual consumers. It's not completely on businesses. We have to move forward with a number of things at the same time, and can really continue to advocate. So, consumers need to do the right thing, but it's part of that too is what we've seen. People go out there and like, I don't even have the choice. Like, how do I want to do the right thing, but I can't. And we hear that a lot actually, and it could be on people wanting to buy packaging that's more sustainable, or it could be something bigger like organics. You're lucky in Edina to have access to organics, but not everyone has that. And so I hear a lot, Ben, I don't even have organics in our city. What should I do about it? I think we have to push these things forward at the same time, and it always helps to advocate. And so I encourage people to get their voice out there, because it actually does make a difference. If you're requesting something, people file that away. I hear sometimes that, well, no one's asking for that. No one's asking for more sustainable packaging. No one's asking for organics. And it's like, wow, that's interesting, because people definitely want it. You just have to, keep saying it, keep advocating for it. I think we push all those things forward at the same time.
I think that's a very, smart answer to that question, because it's so hard to try to make change with only focusing on one. And I think it's important to acknowledge that like so much in the consumer choice is that lack of access. And so I think, so I guess I'm curious, how do you create policies and systems that function in the diverse types of communities in Hennepin County? Because there's high and low income suburbs such as, Deep Haven and Brooklyn Center, and then varying population densities such as like Independence and Minneapolis. We have such a broad array of different types of people also in Minneapolis, and different needs and access. And so how do you make policy at such a large level that's going to apply and work for all these different types of people?
Oh, that's a great question. And I'm glad you realized the diversity of Hennepin County as well, because there are 44 cities, and it's an incredible diversity. And when we're thinking about policies, I think the number one, or the most important thing, is to engage and listen from the outset. Otherwise, you're not even aware of what the needs are. So it's important to identify those needs and what people want. And then I think the second thing is to build in some flexibility to your policy. And I know the risk there is that with increased customization comes increased complexity. And there's something to be said for simplicity when helping with implementation and administration. So you got to walk the line there and figure out what the correct balance is. That's kind of a general response. A more specific response would be on Ordinance 13, our recycling ordinance. With cities, we said, okay, and in the bigger cities, the more dense cities, you need to have what we call a curbside collection program. So that's where they go house to house collecting organics. Whereas in a less dense community, we said, okay, maybe that doesn't make sense because you can't get the route density for organics collection, but you still need to make something available. So at the very least, you need to provide an organics drop-off. So there's that flexibility built in. And then I think another example that I like, there are two examples actually for income and racial diversity, is that our conversations on climate change and building a climate action plan have specifically applied a disparity reduction lens to climate. And we've also done a vulnerability assessment. And that's not something that we would have done in the past, really. So I think all the advocacy and interest around doing a better job there has helped. So instead of just looking at greenhouse gas emissions, mitigation and adaptation, we're specifically saying, what can we do on climate action that will also reduce disparities? And I think that's a big step in the right direction. So it's applying a different lens, using different tools. And then one other thing that I think is important to add is that we've done some, I guess this gets a little smaller scale, but we've done some outreach on organics where we partner with communities and we train people in those communities, give them information about organics so that they feel comfortable with it. And then they reach out to their peers and they spread the word about organics recycling and why it's important to them. So in other words, they don't want, maybe it's the same message, but it's a different messenger. So they don't want to hear it from me because I'm a stranger. Maybe I'm not familiar with their community. And it just makes sense to hear it from your neighbor, to hear it from someone you trust who's a leader in your community. So I think that's something that we need to do more of going forward, is systems aren't just these large, incomprehensible things. They're really made up of people, and we need to tap into those people more to accomplish some of our policy goals.
That's a really great idea. I'm glad you mentioned it about working with like community outreach. Natalia and I were talking before this podcast about the organic recycling program in Edina and how some of the like instructions and messaging that kind of came with the bins that we received, how that was perceived by our families and stuff, and kind of thinking about how should they best have like introduced this program to the community. And I think no matter what kind of literature they gave people with the bins or anything like that, it wouldn't have been satisfactory for everybody. But having folks tell their friends and family and neighbors about the program and kind of learning about it through other people is, I think, how it's making sense for a lot of folks that I interact with. So that's a great idea. And another question that we have for you, kind of, I guess, building off of systems and most of our discussion today, what is one important goal that you have for the county, or a goal that you have for yourself and your role in the next 5 years or so, and how are you all working to achieve that?
That's a big question. It reminds me a little bit of what Commissioner Marion Green said in a speech to us, maybe about a year or so ago, where she said, really, our work at the county is going to be defined by climate action, disparity reduction, and engagement. And I know those are three things, but it made me think about, how does that tie into my work, and what would be my one thing? And I guess if I had to choose one goal over the next 5 years, it would be to increase access and build that goal around accessibility. And what I mean by that is, if someone wants organics recycling service, they can get it. If a city comes to me and says, hey, I'm worried about organics processing capacity, composting capacity, I want to be able to say to that city, the county is developing that infrastructure. You'll have access to that processing capacity. If a resident says, I want to do more to take action on climate and waste, I want to be able to say to them, you have access to the tools and knowledge that you need to take access and go around those barriers or overcome those barriers. So the theme to me would be building access, because ultimately I think then you can build a critical mass and get to enough participation where you get to a tipping point in a positive sense, not like runaway CO2 emissions, but the opposite direction of a tipping point where more and more people participate and we start to see some big changes. And maybe that's cheating on my answer, because accessibility kind of rolls multiple goals into one, but that's important to me and something I think we can make a big difference on over the next 5 years.
I think that's a great way to try to focus in on something, because that kind of does bleed into other stuff, but it's in a really great way. this makes me think of in Sunrise, we always talk about 3.5 when there's not been a movement in the whole history of the United States where if there's 3.5 of the population in active participation that's ever failed. And so Sunrise always talks about that being that tipping point. And I feel like that's what you're talking about. If we had, 3.5 of the population in Hennepin County that was actively doing organics and actively talking about it and trying to push for better sustainability practices, that would be, there has been movements that have even succeeded below that, but there's never been a movement that hasn't succeeded that has reached that critical number. And so I think that is such an important thing to keep in mind, and especially when you talk about, working within communities, and that's kind of how a lot of activism works, where you collaborate with the people that you know in those friend-to-friend relationship, because having someone who you trust telling you that this is important is going to be such a strong, impactful change, or strong voice to make those impactful changes. And then I was also going to ask, what would you recommend to young people interested in local government and sustainability to do to enter this field? Because I know that those are both things that sustainability is something that young people are really passionate about at the moment, I think, because of climate change and all of that. But I think there's kind of a growing number of people that are interested in local government, or at least in my field, and that's what kind of this podcast is trying to cater to. And it's not very glamorized, but it's an exciting place where you can make real change. And so how do you recommend for young people like our listeners to become involved in kind of the space that you're in?
Yeah, my reaction to that is that I like the idea of pairing the study of sustainability with another major or skill or expertise. That seems to be helpful, because if you think about the jobs we do now, sustainability can be a part of so many different jobs. And it's always nice to have your interest. Maybe it's not environmental studies per se, but perhaps it's something else. But you pair the two, and then you can make a difference in so many different fields. So you can make a difference in transportation, land use and planning, purchasing even. So a lot of local governments buy a lot of stuff. They have purchasing power. You can incorporate good specs, sustainable specs into contracts. So I think there's so many different ways that young people can get into local government and combine that with their passion for sustainability. I know it's also difficult to get that first year or two of experience. I think it's just being aware of different opportunities, and although they may not look like they have a long-term possibility, get that experience and then parlay it into something else and keep at it.
I definitely agree. Like once you get your foot in the door, so to speak, it really helps. Like once the first couple people in your local government or county who are involved with stuff, then you can find the next thing to work on. At least that's been kind of my experience with local government and activism stuff. And one other question, just kind of following up on some of the stuff we've been talking about earlier. This might be kind of like I don't want this to be like a political question, but what has your experience been working with like the county commissioners and the county board? And how does like your job as more like a career person in the county interact with the elected officials?
No, Hennepin County is a huge organization, but I've also noticed that our commissioners are leaders in many different ways, particularly on the environment and sustainability. So it's been a positive experience for me working there to see them set the tone and say, let's do more on organics recycling, or let's do more on disparity reduction. So I think there's been a good interplay between the commissioners and the leadership and the staff to really engage residents and search for good solutions and vet those solutions so that we can bring forward things that are accepted by the public and that have a good chance of succeeding and that truly make a difference. So I think, it's a huge organization, but I think the communication is pretty good, and I like the direction we're going.
Great. I'm glad I asked that. It's always interesting talking to the folks that we have on this podcast before. Like we've interviewed a city manager before, and a couple other folks who have like interactions like that. So it's always interesting to kind of look at the electeds and the staff and how those folks work together. So I'm glad that it's been a positive experience for you, and that it all kind of works out.
Yeah, and I was going to add, I think we often talk more about the elected officials. I think people kind of focus in on that because that's what people think about when they think of politics or government. But there's so many people who are not elected working in the background. Like Adrian and I both did an internship with the senators of Minnesota. I was under Senator Amy Klobuchar, and Adrian interned with Senator Tina Smith last summer. And the amount of people who work behind those people that are not elected that do so much is crazy. Like those offices couldn't function with all those types of people or all those non-elected officials. And so I think it's so important to highlight the work that you do and like the collaboration between those two groups, because I feel like it's kind of often like pushed in the background kind of. But besides that, though, I was going to ask, is there anything else you'd like our listeners to know about you, your position, or anything that you'd like to share about anything? You know, this is your moment to kind of share, I guess.
I think the one thing I'd like to add to build somewhat on both of your comments is that when you're working in local government, I think this is an important message for younger people too, is that you need to pair your passion with persistence. Because one thing I've noticed over the years is that you can do a lot of legwork on projects. You can do a lot of work trying to move things forward, and timing is everything. And things don't move forward on a linear basis. Sometimes you get those windows of opportunity and you have to be ready to run. And you have to realize that the work you do chipping away at something makes a difference. And I know that's sometimes you feel like things are moving too slowly, but really I think you're kind of laying the foundation for future action. And so that would be my main message, is that we can do better. I think there's so many things happening in the world when you open the newspaper or you watch the news, and it can be a little depressing. But I think I like to think that we can do better, and if we keep at it, we'll make progress and we'll make breakthroughs and we'll make big improvements. And I'd like to think that we all make a difference if we just keep chipping away.
That's an amazing note to end this on, and I think that's really inspiring for a lot of young people to feel like, you know, the change that we're trying to make and, you know, the action that we're trying to take is going to lead to something. So I really appreciate you leaving us with that. And so I want to thank you again so much for coming on today, Ben, to join us in our municipality. I also want to thank all of our listeners so much for joining us to learn about sustainability at the county level and learn, you know, and listen to the wisdom that Ben has to give us. So please feel free to reach out with any questions or any feedback on the episode in the comments, and make sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and all those lovely places. And we hope that you'll join us soon in our municipality. Thank you so much for listening, guys.